My name is Ian and welcome to Planted. In this video I'm going to share with you 3 skills that are perfect for this time of year. We're about to move out of summer and into the fall and the autumn, and I want to bring to you the benefits of having skills and experience in propagation, planting and pruning. These 3 skills will allow you to have the confidence to buy plants, grow plants and put plants in the ground with great success. Let's go. When you learn to propagate your own plants, typically it'll come from seed, cuttings or division. I find this a very rewarding skill, and it's something that I would encourage you to try yourselves. Being able to bulk up numbers of a particular plant at low cost really is very rewarding. If you've never grown seeds before, I recommend that you grow carrots, beetroot and radish. They're fast, widely available and very cheap. But I want to point out to you that you could probably go into your garden, and if you look around you might find that you already have some seedlings that have grown all by themselves that are great to practice on. This is a plant called Datura. It grew here last year. It had flowers, it had seeds, the seeds dropped to the ground, they went through the winter, and I did nothing to grow these plants. I could easily dig these up, put them into individual pots, and I'd have lots of flowering plants at no cost. This is a plant called Verbena bonariensis. I had 4 seedlings that were separate from each other, dug them up, put them in the ground, and now I get a nice clump. Seedlings really can come about from any successful plant that's got good growing conditions. This is Euphorbia breathless that during the summer months has set seed and they've grown. And all I have to do is get out there, have a look, dig them up, put them in a pot, and I've got myself some free seedlings. If you mulch extensively, this won't happen. This little Euphorbia will not grow in those conditions. As you get a bit more confidence, you can start to buy seed. It might be that you buy seed that's a bit more choice, a little bit different. This is Christia, a plant I featured a few weeks ago. These seedlings were soaked, put in a pot, put in my greenhouse, and you see that I've got quite a nice germination. But what I want to show you here is that just a few weeks later, look how they've grown, given good conditions and a good environment. Now with seeds, you have to look at them every single day, not too wet, not too dry. But I want to use this as an example of where propagation, that is growing seeds, and pruning come together. I am pinching out the tips of these plants so as to break what's called apical dominance. That's the ability for the plant to just keep growing up on one stem. By pinching out these tips, I will encourage the side shoots to grow and give me more foliage and give me a more attractive plant, which is obviously exactly what I want. It doesn't take much, just a few seconds. Now I've got a plant called the corkscrew vine or Cochleacanthus, and it's very successful, people love it. And I bought this seed in the past, and it's something that you can do if you can find a vendor. The seed came with a few extras, but all I wanted to do was grow the Cochleacanthus. And what I do is I'm very careful when handling seeds, because if you drop them, this is in my basement, I would never ever find them. And I'll put them into a jar of warm water. They might be there for an hour or maybe a day, just enough to swell up and rehydrate so that I get fast germination. And this is what we're looking for. This is a plant in the planted courtyard with beautiful flowers of a corkscrew nature. But if we look closely, guess what? We've got another seed pod. And so the sequence starts all over again. This is why it's so special growing plants from seed. Now here's a word of caution. Do not grow all the seeds you get all at once, because you'll end up with way too many. This is a plant called Dolichos. I grew the entire packet. I was very happy I did. I ended up though with 18 plants. I needed 3. So don't fall into the trap of growing everything that comes from a seed. The next way to increase the numbers of plants you have in propagation is to use cuttings. You can take material that you've removed from a plant, cut it into the appropriate length for that variety. In this case with figs, these are 6 to 8 inches long, and they have a number of shoots on each piece. I will put multiple cuttings into one pot, or in this case a glass jar, and I might get 100% growth. They all might die. If they die, it's because they got too wet or too dry, too hot or too cold, and they were unable to put on roots. A little bit of rooting hormone helps nudge them in the right direction. And in one of these glass jars that I've got, you can put 5 or 6 cuttings. And this is a great way to reduce the amount of space you need to grow a good number of plants. And you can practice. There's a plant called Forsythia or Forsythia. Go and practice on that. That's very tough, very robust. Salvia make a great cutting. So do fuchsia. Lots of plants that you've probably got. And you can easily put them into a jar. And if you've got a little heated cabinet like this propagating cabinet I made, there'll be a link in the description. You get consistent heat, consistent temperature, and your success rate will greatly improve. You can, of course, put cuttings directly outside in the ground, but it's a much slower process. And this is what you end up with. Lots of little trees with new roots and new foliage, and it is rewarding. This is a great thing for children to do. Get them taking cuttings and look at their faces when they grow. I think that propagation by division is probably one of the easiest ways to increase your plant numbers. And what you're doing here is you're taking an existing clump, typically a perennial, and you break it, cut it into small rooted plants that need their own pot. This is a plant called a juga. You see how easy it is just to identify that little shoot with roots, put it into its own pot, plant it at the right height. And you can take one plant and readily convert it into 5, 6, 7, or 8 plants, as you see here. They can stay in this pot for a month, maybe 6 weeks, and then you can plant them out. Now, something for you to consider, when you start to propagate, you might find that you've got lots of plants that are very special, and in the springtime, if you can make a cold frame, which is what you see here, I have a piece that covers up the end. It means that it can vent in the daytime. You cover it at night and it stays warm, and your plants can thrive, they can grow, and will not get chilled when it gets colder at night. This is a plant called hedychium. This is a perennial. It's tender in my area. It will not go through the winter, but it's a really good example of how you take a clump that you could plant out as it is, or you could divide it into lots of smaller plants. Here you can see you've got these little shoots that indicate the plant is ready to grow. And this is quite drastic. You will probably find that you'll cut through a few shoots that you didn't realize were there. You will not be able to grow everything from this clump. There will be some material that you can't use. But if you take a clump of this size, it has a shoot, it's got a stem or a trunk, and then it's got the roots that go around it. And that will readily grow into a beautiful plant. You have to make sure, though, that you've got a supply of pots that are the right size. A little bit of root pruning is always a good idea. And as this is a direct copy from the clump, it's got the same genetic code, it'll have the same fragrance and same performance. And that is propagation by division. Now when it comes to pruning, it's very easy to get a pair of clippers and just start hacking away. And that really is not what we're trying to do. I want to impress upon you the discipline of pruning for fruit production, flower production, and also improving shape. This is my white everlasting sweet pea. It put on a beautiful show earlier in the summer. Those flowers have all turned to seeds, and when a plant's got seeds in production, it tends not to want to flower again. So here you see me removing those seed pods to initiate new growth, which will lead to new flowers. Now at this time of the year, the figs are growing incredibly fast, but they don't know that it's going to get cold pretty soon as we move into September and October. And it just keeps on putting out new figs. So what I want to do is I want to encourage it to ripen those figs that it set earlier and put all the goodness into those figs swelling and being tasty and delicious. So not only by removing this growth do I get the nutrient to go into the figs, but I also remove foliage that lets sunlight get to those figs, which helps them ripen. So this is not for shape, this is not for flowers, this is purely to help those figs ripen. Now, Here is my beautiful Edgeworthy. I had a subscriber comment that they were very keen to see how this plant would grow after its rather major haircut. And this was done only a few weeks ago. It got a summer pruning because it sets flowers in the fall ready for the spring. Prune it in the spring and you cut off all the flowers. And here we are. Here's that plant looking beautiful. It's got shoots at the base of the plant that are looking very healthy, and then at the ends of all of the branches it's put out wonderful growth. This fig is receiving pruning specifically so that it fits in the barrel. It's not for fruiting and it's not for shape. I just want to cut it back so that I can add foliage and get it through the winter. Now, many of us have got hedges, and having a hedge is a wonderful barrier. It gives us privacy. But what happens with a hedge is that it can grow very wide at the top, which means it will grow narrow at the bottom. I made you a video about cutting a hedge with this little gadget that gives us a taper. This forces it to be narrower at the top, which lets it be wider at the base. I would never use hedge clippers on this because that tends to rip and tear the leaves, and I would never use clippers freehand without this guide. Planting is another area where many people take unnecessary shortcuts, expecting to get a wonderful return. I like to liken it to painting. Any painter will spend a long time preparing their area before they paint, and that ensures a really good result, and that's exactly what you have to do with planting. If you are blessed with good soil, then you should be very fortunate and lucky. Many people, particularly those in a new house, end up with compacted mud that has very little life-giving force. What you really need to do is feed that soil so that when you do go planting, you've got an environment that can store water, store oxygen, and store nutrients, and have lots of microbial activity. I'm a big fan of incorporating leaves and foliage into my garden. I don't do this every year. I'll take a patch, dig it over, and let those leaves mingle and do what they do. It's a food source for the microorganisms that you need to get established that help make nutrients available to the roots. There's lots of videos on soil. I even did a video on what is topsoil and why you can't buy it, and that's worth seeing. Once you've got good soil, your efforts at growing plants will become really easy. And this is what soil should look like. It's lightweight, it's got a honeycomb structure, and when you crush it in your hands, it crumbles into small pieces. And this is what a tiller will shatter, which is not good. And above all, good soil is clean to the touch. It won't leave your hands muddy and dirty. With good soil, you can now plant with a clear conscience, knowing that you are going to put your plant into a nice, wide planting pit. Not overly deep so that it sinks, but nice and wide. And have your plant ready to put in that pit. And this is what I like to do. Backfill from around the sides, because this essentially makes the planting pit even wider. I'm not going to overly compact the soil. Once it's half full, I will then add more water to make sure that it's nicely hydrated. Once it's hydrated, I'll then go back in and replant. And this is going to increase the root volume of your plant by 300 or 400% because it can grow out nice and wide, nice and easily. When it comes to planting, you're not always going to be planting in the ground. Frequently, you might need to be planting in a pot. This is a dahlia crown that I overwintered, a rather substantial dahlia crown. Get the right size pot so it's not too big. And my growing medium here is deliberately on the dry side. It's not bone dry, but it's not clumpy and wet. And the reason for that is that I can make it easily shake and move around all of those tubers. This rocking and rattling movement I'm doing now means that I get absolutely maximum contact with my growing medium to the area of the root. And I always leave it 2 or 3 inches shallow. Now, standing a pot in a little tray of water is the best way to rehydrate it. This pot's been in that little tray for about half an hour, and we've got this nice dark colour from top to bottom. indicating that it's purely and completely hydrated. If it's light and you put it in the ground, it will dry out and then it will die, and that doesn't help anybody. You can make sure that you keep it in the pot until it's time to plant. So now that we've got the ability to rehydrate, we can rehydrate in the planting pit, we can rehydrate in a tray, or we can do this with a tank. And here you can see it's completely submerged to the top of the root ball, and all those bubbles are just able to exit, knowing that now water is coming into that root ball and rehydrating it. I've said this many times in previous videos, this ability to rehydrate prior to planting is the key. Here we have that very same plant being planted within minutes of it being properly hydrated. And I will frequently use my pot as a guide. This lets me set it at the right height, get it in the right place at the right angle, and I know that my plant will easily fit in my planting pit. And then I add water. Now this is a white plumbago that I want to save. So I give it a little haircut, reduce it by at least a third, get some potting mix, add a tiny little bit of fertilizer, add a little bit of garden soil, and I'm going to put this in a bigger size pot, one that it will go through the winter. And all I'm doing here is adding that mix on all sides, making sure to keep the plant centered. And finally, this is one of my best videos I ever did. This was in an endeavor many years ago called Your Garden Show, and I showed you how to plant up a container. You get the pots of your choice and you arrange them with their plastic pot only. And all you do here is bother to add soil around all of those pots in every little nook and cranny, so that when you take out the plastic pot, you've got this really nice, well-formed pocket that you can then sink your plant in. It takes a little bit of time, but it is by far the best way. When you remove your plastic pot, there's your planting pit, and you know that your root ball will fit in there beautifully. So that's it. We've got pruning, planting, and propagation. Thank you so much. Please subscribe, please like, and forward this to anybody that's interested in gardening.